Technical expertise has become probably more commoditized in the world of AI. I tend to believe that they can be more made than grown.
Valuations start to go up because of some of that specialty.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Shoot the Moon podcast, broadcasting live and direct from Revenue Rocket World headquarters in Bloomington, Minnesota. If you tune in to this podcast regularly, and frankly, even if you don't, Revenue Rocket is the world premier M&A advisor to tech-enabled services companies. With me today are my partners, Ryan Barnett and Matt Lockhart. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here. Excited about our subject, but also, if you haven't talked to us recently or visited our site, there's some new exciting opportunities that we're working on with clients that are going to market and looking for new partners. So that's cool. Ryan, how are you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, feel free to check us out, revenuerocket.com/current-deals, and you got some great opportunities. Just loaded one up just now. So absolutely, it's great to be in market. It's been a busy year this year, and I think will continue to be that through the rest of this year, next year, hopefully beyond. On this podcast, we talk about things that our customers see and what we talk about weekly. So part of our business is M&A advisory, a huge part of our business, and we help companies buy other firms or help you sell your firm when the time is right. And we also do a bit of growth strategy consulting and advisory. And one of the things we've believed in for years is that firms really need to specialize, verticalize, and productize. What I mean by that is you want to be really good at one thing and what your company can do, whether that's it can be just about anything, but as long as you're really good at that one technical expertise, that specialization is helpful. We also believe that firms should pick a vertical market approach in which you tackle a vertical that's big enough to matter, small enough to dominate, and that you can become a really substantial player in that market. And there's all sorts of benefits to that. And then third, we want you to make sure that when you have selling services today, that they're productized up. And one of the things that happens when you take this methodology is you get this other equation of how sales teams are set up. And we oftentimes see what we'd call a hunter and farmer model. And so today I wanted to look at what's the intersection between vertical markets and hunter-farmer. And this is based on the conversations that we've had with several customers who have gone through this. And so, Mike, why don't you get us set up? Why should companies pick a vertical market? And what challenges does a seller have if they come from being a generalist to start?
Yeah, sure thing, Ryan. And great question and great topic overall. I think what's really interesting is, vertical domain specialty is more important than ever right now in the world of AI, because people want to know. Buyers of your services want to know that you know their domain, that you understand their functions, and that you understand them functionally, not just technically. Technical expertise has become probably more commoditized in the world of AI than ever. And what clients value is the domain expertise you're bringing to the deployment of that technology, and the innovation, as I often say, that AI cannot replicate. And so, vertical markets, having history with those vertical markets, and having, frankly, success with the vertical markets in your specialty, which is your technology specialty, is super important. And when we, think about SVP, specialty is, really, your technical specialty and the areas within the various tech stacks that you operate. Vertical is what it is. It's industry vertical. And then being able to, turn that into something that's easy to buy is what we call productize, which has to do with product market fit and your ability to, execute on that. So hopefully that gives a little bit of the lay of the land, Ryan.
Yeah, I think it does. And when you talk to a lot of firms, especially I think managed service providers fall on this a lot. Most firms that we talk to today run with kind of a generalist sales model. And that can really be generalist on the solutions they sell, as well as generalist on the vertical market that they target. Matt, I'd love to get your opinion. Why is that happening today, especially kind of based on size? And what happens? What's the cost of having that generalist approach?
Yeah, I think it's really natural, right? A lot of IT services firms are founder-led businesses, right? Where they are starting locally, right? They think about their market geographically and very often in their own backyard. And so then they look at the relationships that they have historically and the capability oftentimes, when starting out, is can be specialized, but not specialized to the point where it makes a difference, to any particular vertical. And so it's sort of the path of least resistance, I guess, if you will, Ryan, where you can capture revenue, you can win new customers simply because you're local to them and you are fulfilling a base need, a base capability need, from that customer. And so, because it's the path of least resistance towards, revenue, it continues forward and sort of momentum is built to think about their market in a generalist sense, as opposed to, in verticalization, as Mike talked about, you really have the opportunity to shine and be better known, in that particular vertical because you've combined both a capability expertise as well as a vertical expertise. So it just kind of oftentimes just happens organically, because there isn't sort of that strategic plan or roadmap to sort of move up the value chain, and verticalization is part and parcel to that.
Yeah, and Matt, I think when you have advised clients, I think one point of caution you've always said is that this is going to take a bit of time. Can you just explain to the audience why this does take a bit of time and why it's important to take a bit of time to get this right?
Yeah, sure. I think the natural steps. So change is hard for all of us. Change is hard, and it is a change in a go-to-market model. Clearly there's an existing customer base that needs to be taken care of, and sort of then there's the planning and the strategy. It in and of itself can take time. What market really makes the most sense based upon your experience, and then the need for customers in that particular vertical market, for the specialization and the services, provided. And then how likely it is to be able to cover that market successfully, right? If you think about, say, for example, financial services, well, that's really huge if you think of financial services as a whole, right? So oftentimes more thought needs to be put into how do I serve a distinct submarket within a bigger market. But so the planning takes time, and then the journey, right, towards verticalization is you will very likely be doing, both work from a generalist perspective as you are building up more focus and the muscles to enter a vertical market with that message and that expertise and that knowledge of the needs of that vertical market, and being able, quite simply, to be speaking in the language of that vertical market. And so, oftentimes the first step is really from a sales and marketing perspective, right? And which coincides with the analysis necessary to, go approach a specific vertical market, or it very well may be a start where you pick a couple or a few and you see how your actions are resonating, and then you adapt from there. And then, sort of moving again up the value chain into, more and more distinct specialization, as well as potentially the introduction of your own intellectual property as it relates to that end vertical market, with the specialization of services that one has. And so, when you think about that journey of beginning to focus while you're also caring and maintaining for, all of the business, building up the experience, building up the stories, building up the team, and expanding the knowledge across an organization, and not going too fast, right? Allowing the maturation to really happen as you expand your overall go-to-market.
Yeah, and it's really great setup, and I think this is as you've mentioned, that the journey is long and it can be a little bit arduous, but the rewards can be very powerful. You start to look at valuations start to go up because of some of that specialty. Your selling motion becomes faster. Your marketing motion becomes a lot easier to articulate, and even how you target your sales team changes a little bit. Mike, and I'd love to talk about that team function a bit here. Many companies, when then they change from that founder mode, the CEO is oftentimes the salesperson, maybe the only salesperson. Sometimes there's a big reason for that. It can be a compensation alone. Bringing a hired gun on costs a bit of money. But as organizations evolve, Mike, can you help me understand kind of what roles start to get brought in beyond that one or two kind of key sellers?
Yeah, for sure, Ryan. I mean, I think it's important to note that, beyond a couple sellers, you really, really need to have marketing support, right? And I think, when you begin to think about how hunters and farmers interact, you really need to have a effective, model that will be supported versus, as I often say, you can't just tell a seller, here's your desk, here's your phone, knock yourself out. Certainly they can bring some of their own leads, and maybe they have some relationships, some of their Rolodex, particularly if they've been in the vertical. Let's assume they're kind of a vertical sales expert in the verticals that you're choosing to focus on or are focusing on as a company. But, marketing and leads are really, really important, particularly to hunters who are very effective at closing opportunities with greenfield customers. But, ideally, in the current, world environment, you need a mature marketing function to be able to deliver and point to opportunities to assist those salespeople, to allow them to do what they do best, which is to call on those clients, qualify them, and move them from a marketing qualified lead to a sales qualified lead, ultimately to a client. And super, super critical. There's likely a function, frankly, also around administration. We call it sales ops or sales administration. Those roles are super important in supporting a hunter-farmer-based sales organization that's vertically aligned. There's also likely in that administration function resides proposal development, sort of sales tracking and metrics tracking, CRM logistics, appointment logistics, right? Managing sort of appointments, setting appointments. Think of the administration of a sales role. I think that, sales is a team sport. And if you embrace the concept, the team is broader than just the hunter and farmer and needs specific support roles moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And if I was to define just a few things that I heard there, we often hear that marketing role that's really there in our IT services world, charged with getting leads. It's oftentimes their primary focus there. Alongside of them is oftentimes a business development rep or a sales development rep, and their job to crack open that door, get in front of someone, and usually typically hand that off to an account rep or what we call a business development rep, who would typically be that hunter. They're going to go thrive on the getting the kill of the deal, making sure that they're getting clients onboarded, but eventually handing it over to an account team, which we might call a farm. So their job help build and grow those relationships and grow existing accounts. And so if we combine these two, Matt, you talked a bit about vertical market, and you talk about those roles. How do you change when you hiring hunters or hiring BD reps or business development reps or even account reps when you look at this vertical market approach?
Yeah, well, I mean, not surprised logically. There are other experts. There are other selling experts as well as support experts, from marketing to pre-sales support to et cetera, who have a great deal of experience in a vertical market sales motion, right? And so, the old proverbial, you go swim in the ponds, right, where or go fish in the ponds where the fish are, and oftentimes that works. Now, it may change a bit of the hiring profile, where in the past you were looking for a generalist with maybe deeper expertise in your specific capability. And this allows you to find great people who have deeper experience in the vertical, but may need to, grow in the understanding of the service and the capabilities. And, we've seen that play out and can be very successful. So you sort of get a different pool, but a focused pool, and it correlates to what Mike was talking about earlier, where that's one of the reasons that you verticalize, is you just become better known. You become better known by customers and better known by talent. And that level of sort of understanding of the market and swimming in the same pond allows you to be understood by the partner ecosystem in those verticals and the other specialists as well. And so it's really your focus changes from core-based selling capability and layered with a services background to maybe core-based selling with a focus and an expertise in understanding the vertical.
Very well up there. That one, the Rolodex that's in the vertical, that really starts to matter. The language they learn, it's likely harder to teach someone the intricacies of financial services versus selling a product of an MSP. Just where you fish, I think, changes. That's such a great point. Mike, if I think about the compensation structures that changes here, what kind of things have you seen be challenges when you start to adopt a hunter farmer mentality, and does that change with verticalization? And I'll give you just like a preview. We oftentimes see a business development reps who are there, that hunter, getting paid on deals for quite some time. Is there better best practices on how those hunters versus farmers should get compensated in the terms of an IT services firm?
Yeah, for sure, Ryan. I mean, I think, you have to understand in a hunter farmer sort of environment, and we refer to hunter and farmers, obviously the hunters that are going out and getting greenfield net new customers, and farmers that are much more about after the hunter lands the account, expanding into that account or those accounts. Hunters need to be, salespeople do what they're incented to do, right? And in a world of a hunter who's designed to find net new greenfield customers, typically they're compensated for doing just that, right? Finding a new customer that's not currently on the roster within their territory and converting that, potential client into an actual client, and getting the first order, right? And ultimately developing that relationship probably within, or for a period of no more than 12 months, where during that time they're handing off that relationship to the farmer team, or the, call them what you want, the customer experience team, the inside sales team, however you want to use the term. There's a handoff from hunter to farmer that, has to be handled properly, because typically hunters are very good at developing relationships quickly. And that customer wants to keep working with that hunter. And it's in everyone's best interest, hunter, farmer, organization, client, to hand that relationship or begin to transition that relationship. And typically it happens within the first 12 months. So it can free them up to work on new greenfield opportunities. And, and I think there's a lot of discussion about, are hunters in particularly made or grown? And you may have your own opinion about that. I tend to believe that they tend to be more made than grown. But, certainly you can learn and enhance your skills in both lanes. But compensation plans for farmers are also different in that they're focused on continuing to get a greater share of wallet over time. Typically, they're less risk-based. Hunters' compensation plans tend to be much more risk-based and much more incented on finding new greenfield logos. And the duration of how long they get paid after that client is a client is relatively short. A lot of organizations try to ask one person to do both things, and oftentimes that's where things break down, because people tend to align or line up either as hunters or farmers. Hunters are not farmers, farmers are not hunters, and don't get that confused. And when you ask one person to do both jobs, they're naturally going to gravitate towards one or the other, from my experience. And if you've been in that hybrid role where you're asking your salespeople to be salespeople and do both of these types of roles in a vertical, it can be challenging. And you may be paying them in a different way than you likely should. Back to the original question, Ryan, which means, yes, those comp plans are very different and need to be much more focused on what you want them to do. In the case of hunters, it's about finding new logos.
Yeah, well said, Mike. And when we think about this, the Shoot the Moon podcast is often focused on M&A. And so, Matt, when you start to think about firms and a buyer is really evaluating an IT services firm, can they actually see whether that sales engine is built for the vertical focus? And if they can see that vertical focus, and what does that do to a valuation?
Yeah, well, I mean, the data certainly tells part of the story, right? Where you see increased growth in the vertical, both in the form of new logo acquisition as well as retention of customers and hopefully growth of same store customers. And oftentimes that is a real good indicator, but not the whole story, right? Understanding, again, where a firm might be on the maturity level. Are they really good at it from a sales and marketing perspective? But has that really gone through the overall operation or not? Those things are sort of come out in more detailed discussions, due diligence. But, to your question, let's make the assumption a firm has done well. They're on the journey. A majority of their revenue is in one or two verticals. They demonstrate they've got the go-to-market model and are doing team-based selling with subject matter experts in addition to the sales team that is supported by the marketing team. It absolutely has an impact on valuation, especially if it is tied to a growing sector. If it is tied to a sector, where regulation is important, think banking, think healthcare, think financial services overall. Certainly some can be in, markets related to, state, local, federal, government capabilities as well. One of the areas that we're seeing, and back to some of the opportunities, is in the different sectors supported by operational technologies in addition to IT technologies, because there's just a lot happening there. And so when firms see this expertise and this highly mature go-to-market model, which demonstrates good strategic thought and execution, those firms are simply more valuable. They're more valuable because of the expertise, but then they're also more valuable because buyers know that verticalization can produce better results, both top line and bottom line.
Yeah, so this focus, I think the other things just come natural. Marketing becomes clearer because you have a focus area and it's easier to generate leads. Those leads turn into better sales opportunities. Business development reps have better relationships, head relationships. Those hunters can hunt better because it's just less generalist. And those account teams start to get that IP that really helps them understand the business challenges, which allows for really nice account expansion. I can absolutely see how that ultimately leads to just better valuation because it leads to better growth and profit. Well said. I think a really good job. Mike, Matt, this has been really helpful here. Mike, I'll leave it with just a closing question or thought. Now, if a person's listening to this for the first time and they haven't taken a vertical market approach, what should they do this for the rest of this week and going into the next week to think about this and examine if it's something right for their business?
Yeah, great question, Ryan. I think, what they should do is contemplate, think a little bit about what you're really passionate about from a market perspective. Likely you work today, if you're not vertically aligned, or at least don't think you're vertically aligned, you likely have a lion's share of your business in a market, right? It just naturally sort of happens that way. Now, it could be spread across a variety of markets, but you'll see some concentration when you analyze the data. Might be a good opportunity. I'll put my plug in for Claude and its Excel plugin to do a little analysis of your customers, your accounting system, and see what markets they're in and see how that sort of natural gravity to those markets has occurred for you, then you have to really ask yourself, am I passionate about that market? Do I really want to hang out where those folks hang out? Like, is it a market where I see us adding a lot of value? Maybe it's a market that's happened kind of by accident, organically. But I would tell you, in order to really master a vertical domain, you as a leader have to be passionate about serving that market. You're going to be in that market, thinking about going to virtual events, trade events, talking the lingo, meeting with people that are in that market. So you have to have some passion for the market. We certainly have people that have aligned their business accidentally towards a market, like say they're very focused on financial, many of their customers are financial services, but they're just not passionate about that market. They're like, yeah, well, it happened because we are in, a financial center like San Francisco or New York or whatever, but it may not be their passion. I think to be really vertically aligned, leadership has to have passion for the market, because then they can bring real, verve to the conversations with clients that's meaningful. So you really have to look inside and think about that. And then I have to think, I would recommend the next week you look at firms that are focused on that market. As I often say, success leaves clues, and you may find some interesting learning that comes from that. And the good news is, again, with access to all the tools we have today, with AI, a lot of that research gets much easier. So it might be a way to find a few firms that maybe focus a lion's share of their time and energy that are kind of lookalikes for you, or it's aspirational for you to become that are focused on that market, and you can see what might be they're doing to go to market that might be something you can learn. And with that, we'll recommend we tie a ribbon on it for this week's Shoot the Moon podcast. We encourage you to tune in next time when we unpack further topics of growth and M&A in the IT services world. With that, make it a great week.